Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to part 2 of the Claremont Serial Killer Case. So if you missed part 1, I will link it down below and up here so you can catch up, otherwise this video will make no sense whatsoever. So let's get straight into part 2. So the West Australian Police formed a special task force to investigate the Claremont serial killings, and they named this task force Macro. As part of Task Force Macro, everyone was expected to sign a confidentiality agreement. The investigation could only be discussed in a work environment, so for example, not down at the pub, even with other members of Task Force Macro, and any violation of this agreement would result in termination. And from what I researched, at least one person was terminated from Task Force Macro. An interesting but often criticised tactic Task Force Macro would use on persons of interest was giving them a questionnaire, and this was a particularly interesting questionnaire. So this questionnaire had questions such as, are you the Claremont killer on it? And apparently there is some sort of psychological idea behind this, but I could not find any information on it. So if you are aware of anything about it, let me know in the comments below. The mayor of the town of Claremont, Peter Wagers, was even a suspect at one point filling out this controversial questionnaire. So Peter Wagers was actually leasing a premise to a taxi driver at the time of Sarah Spears' disappearance, and he claimed that this taxi driver had actually given Sarah a lift right before she had disappeared. And it was thought at the time that this taxi driver was kidnapping young women for Peter so he could have his way with them before killing them. So Peter Wagers' premise was raided by police, and he and the taxi driver were ordered to give samples of their DNA for testing. However, nothing resulted of this. Initially, Task Force Macro had really concentrated on the taxi drivers of Perth, as I stated, because of course all three girls had gone missing when they went to catch a taxi. And from late 1995 there had actually been reports to the police of inappropriate behaviour from several taxi drivers, which really added fuel to the fire that a taxi driver was potentially responsible for the disappearance of all three girls. A group of 2,000 licensed taxi drivers in Western Australia had their DNA tested, and any taxi drivers with a significant criminal history lost their taxi license. The standards were also raised for who was actually allowed to be a taxi driver, which actually was one positive result from this case, making it safer for other women to travel in taxis in Perth. Any decommissioned taxi vehicles were completely stripped of their insignia. That may imply that they were currently a licensed taxi driver. So over the years, Task Force Macro would investigate 3,000 people, and they even disbanded temporarily in 2004. And at one point the investigators on the Claremont case actually got so desperate for information that they turned to another infamous Perth-based serial killer, David Burney. So Detective Superintendent Paul Ferguson was actually the one to meet with David Burney. And ironically, Ferguson was actually the one to catch David Burney and his equally horrific killer wife, Catherine Burney, years earlier. So this move was in an effort to get into the mind of a killer or a psychopath, depending how you look at it. It is unknown, however, what was discussed in this interview. And I, for one, would love to know what was said. Another criticism in the Claremont investigation was the lead investigator, Dave Capone, having tunnel vision in regards to his main suspect. So public servant Lance Williams was under police scrutiny, intense police scrutiny, for a decade and interviewed 6 times before being exonerated of the Claremont killings. He was also considered the chief suspect in the case for this duration of time. So I'm not joking when I say he was under intense police scrutiny, and this part of the investigation really quite shocked me, the length they went to focus in on this guy with basically little to no evidence that he had anything to do with it. He was just kind of a strange guy, to be honest, when the real perpetrator was out there living their life. So the police actually had a 24-hour surveillance of Lance Williams, which he was actually aware of. And he was so aware of it to the point that if Lance was doing something out of his day-to-day routine, like going to visit his grandma, he would phone the police and say, just to let you know, I'm going to do this, it's out of my usual routine, just so you don't suspect I'm up to anything odd. So of course this was said to have a massive psychological impact on Lance Williams, and it led him to have really terrible anxiety and believe that he was being followed even years after being cleared of the murders. So in many people's minds, Lance Williams was considered guilty and he was treated as such, which of course impacted his whole life, and it really spilled over to the lives of his family and friends. So Lance Williams actually became a suspect in 1997 when he offered a woman a lift who was asking him directions to the nearest bus stop in Claremont. He told the woman, "You'll never get a bus this time of night." However, it did turn out that this woman was actually an undercover police officer acting as bait in the Claremont investigation. However, Lance Williams just dropped the undercover officer, who he thought was just, of course, a day-to-day civilian, 3 or 4 kilometres down the road, and that was that. He didn't try to come onto her, didn't try to abduct her, nothing. He was simply giving her a lift, believing that it was not safe for her to be out late at night, given the recent circumstances around Claremont, and he dropped her off a couple of k's down the road. Police, however, were convinced that Lance Williams fit the profile of a serial killer. So Lance would actually spend considerable time driving around Claremont and other precincts of Perth, sometimes driving around them up to 30 times, which admittedly is incredibly odd behaviour, but that doesn't make you a serial killer. And Lance also lived with his parents too, and his parents claimed he was home the night of all 3 girls' disappearances. So police followed every single move Lance Williams made for 6 months after he gave the undercover police officer a lift, which he was not aware of, until he was eventually pulled over, until they finally pulled him over in Claremont at 2 a.m. on April the 5th, 1998. So police held Lance in custody upon his arrest and questioned him for 17 hours, really interrogating him on his nocturnal activities. Lance Williams said to police he was merely concerned with the safety of women in the area and was just keeping an eye out for them. He voluntarily provided hair and saliva samples before eventually being released. In the years following, Lance's house was raided 3 times, bugged, and his backyard was even dug up. And they bugged his workplace as well. So Lance Williams' identity was actually made public within days of being pulled over in 1998, making his life incredibly difficult from basically that moment onwards. Because as I did state, a lot of people considered him guilty from day dot. However, Lance actually seemed quite forgiving of the police intrusion on his life, stating that he knew that they were just doing their job. Lance Williams' brother was also interviewed twice by police, describing the police as adamant that his brother had committed these crimes and having extreme tunnel vision in the Claremont case. Williams was finally no longer a suspect, with DNA technology finally ruling him out. It is thought that the intense police scrutiny of Lance Williams and the fact that they really, as I said, had tunnel vision and focused all their efforts into him really took away from the actual perpetrator. And this, again, is another massive criticism in the investigation. And it's also thought to have hindered the investigation, and not to mention the fact they had no forensic evidence at all, to the best of my knowledge, to pin Lance Williams to the Claremont killings. Unfortunately, in February of this year, Lance died after a battle with cancer. So now we are fast forwarding to 2016, and I want to talk about a man named Bradley Robert Edwards, who is currently 49 years old. He was a stepfather and husband, although divorced in 2015, and he is considered a quiet but friendly man. From the year 2000, he spent a lot of his time as a volunteer at the Kewdale Little Athletics Club, and Kewdale was a suburb in which Bradley Edwards lived in. He was also considered a really helpful neighbour, even helping his fellow neighbours with electronic connections. He was also affectionately nicknamed Bogey or Boggy, I'm not too sure, and this came from his school days, but I've got no idea what it means. So he initially joined the Little Athletics Club as a volunteer when his daughter, or his stepdaughter, was a part of it. However, after she grew out of Little Athletics, he continued to stay on as a volunteer. Bradley Edwards even received a community award for his service in sports. And in 2013, Bradley Edwards received a 10-year service award for his contribution to the Kewdale Little Athletics Club. And this was actually awarded to him by former West Australian Labor leader Eric Ripper, so it was considered quite the honour. He was also formerly a Telstra technician, which is a phone company here in Australia. He was described by most people as very nice and friendly, and quoted as anyone who knew him wouldn't have a bad word to say about him by a family friend. So in December of 2016, just days before Christmas, Bradley Robert Edwards was arrested and charged with the murders of Ciara Glennon and Jane Rimmer. And in February of this year, so in 2018, Bradley Edwards was charged with the murder of Sarah Spears. Despite having no body, and it is still unknown at this current time how he has been tied to Sarah's murder. So it is believed that DNA that was found on a kimono from a 1988 home invasion and indecent assault matched samples on Ciara Glennon's body. It is believed Bradley Edwards dropped the kimono on his way out from the home invasion after taking it off the clothesline before the attack. During the home invasion, Edwards attempted to rape an 18-year-old girl. However, her screams scared him enough and caused him to flee the scene. The kimono he dropped that day had been sitting in evidence for 28 years. And this DNA also matched the sample of a 17-year-old girl that had been abducted in Claremont as well in 1995. So a year before the Claremont serial killings began. She was abducted, she had a hood put over her head, she was taken to Karrakatta Cemetery here in Perth and raped. This, as well as the 1988 home invasion, had actually remained unsolved until police decided to test old evidence with new technology. This included testing the kimono. So the DNA from the kimono came up as matching other samples on the police database. As I stated, it matched the Karrakatta Cemetery rape and, of course, evidence from Ciara Glennon's body. Although these samples don't give police a specific name, just weeks later, Bradley Robert Edwards was arrested and charged with the two murders of Jane Rimmer and Ciara Glennon. So upon Edwards' arrest, he gave DNA samples, and 12 hours later, he was formally charged. I should mention, I am not aware of and could not find how these three bits of connected evidence led them to Bradley Robert Edwards. I could speculate, but I do not want to give you incorrect information. But it will come out in time. So since his arrest, Bradley Edwards has accumulated 9 charges. These include 3 counts of willful murder, 2 counts of aggravated sexual penetration without consent, 2 counts of deprivation of liberty, one of indecent assault, and the break and enter that dated back to 1988. Edwards pleaded not guilty to all 9 charges this year. So the trial is at this stage set for May of next year. Court prosecutors are currently reviewing and categorizing more than 1.5 million pages of material in regards to the Claremont case. And for those interested, Bradley Edwards does have the option to apply for trial by judge as opposed to trial by jury, given how publicised this case was, but in my opinion he doesn't have the right to shit. He should get what he gets. Honestly, whether it's by judge or by jury, he's lost rights at this point. So the Claremont serial killer case has the potential and probably will be the longest and most complex trial in West Australian history. And of course there are no theories to this case, but as a side note, I don't believe Bradley Robert Edwards killed only 3 women. I don't think if you start committing heinous crimes in 1988, then you kill 3 women and you get away with all of these crimes, I don't think you just stop and go on to leave a normal and what looked like a respectful, good life. He seemed like an outstanding citizen of Perth, and I think there's more victims. I do actually talk about that in an upcoming video, so keep an eye out. I just don't think you brutally murder 3 women and go on to lead a normal existence. There's just no way in hell, in my opinion. But I believe everything will come out in the upcoming trial, so look out in the distant future for a part 3 or 4 or however many parts we need to this video. I'm going to wrap it up right here. I hope you enjoyed this 2-part series. Leave your comments down below on your thoughts, any requests, leave them down below. Don't forget to like, it helps me out so much. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you do not miss any of my true crime videos in the future. My next one is going to be a missing persons case. So I will speak to you guys very soon. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day and stay safe out there.
I've been pushing away everybody I love. I don't know what to do. Need a sign from above.